Welcome to the Fleet Geeks podcast. We're here to help develop fleet and transport professionals. Do you want to progress and develop your skills and knowledge? We promise to bring lively conversation and debate around interesting issues and keep you bang up to date with changes in our awesome industry. The Fleet Geeks are a community of professionals, and if you enjoy the podcast, why not join the discussion for free in the Fleet Geek community over on Facebook?
My name's Pete Rushman, and I'm joined today, and I'm really conscious to get your name pronounced correctly now. So, I mispronounced it when we first met on the call a moment ago. So I'm joined by Saul Jeavons, and I think I've pronounced it. I've got a thumbs up.
Spot on, mate. Yeah.
Appreciate that. Cool. So I'm joined today by Saul, and we are talking about reducing risk and 6 key areas to reduce risk, which is really interesting. We've come up with these 6 areas which we're going to explore shortly, but I just wanted to introduce you to Saul first and his business Transafe Network. I think we have similar people that we know, but we operate in slightly different parts of road risk and road safety, and I'm fascinated to hear more. I met Saul recently in Leicester at the Space Centre. He was a guest and expert speaker for the National Highways Conference. So I'm interested to know how that gig came about, and how you know Mark and Simon and the team there, and a bit more about your background. So to start with, Saul, could you please just sort of share for the listeners a bit about your background and what the business does and how you came to be talking about what you spoke about, which was we were talking about just culture and those kinds of things, which was really interesting as well as part of that thing. I was drawn because Matthew Syed was there. We were exhibiting as a business, and he's fascinating. I've read his books, which I'm sure you probably are aware of as well. But I was really impressed with the professionalism of yourself speaking as well. I thought it was really, really interesting what you spoke about. So, yeah, how did that come about? Tell us a bit more about you, Saul.
Yeah, so I guess that came about just as much as anything through kind of being on the scene for a long time. So my first job in road safety was 30 years ago this year. And I started off working in local authority. So I was a road safety officer doing education, training, publicity, everything from training for midwives and health visitors about giving information on child car seats for new parents, through to sort of stuff for older drivers, speed, seat belts, the cycle proficiency as it was in those days, bikeability now, running the teams that did that. Then I went and worked for a company who did a lot more stuff in the corporate space. So they were actually a niche publishing company who did a lot of road safety publications, but who also did things like we ran the BP Road Safety Schools program in the UK. Then from there went to the Transport Research Laboratory, TRL, and while I was there did a lot of work internationally. So I worked in 33 different countries now, and started doing a lot of work there with the oil and gas industry, who obviously don't have a choice over where to operate. They have to operate where the oil and gas is, and very often that's in places that don't have great road safety. They've got an economy where there's not an awful lot of money spent on making sure the roads are safe. There's not a lot of money spent on making sure the vehicles are safe, that the drivers are well trained. Not a lot of money has gone into enforcement, the emergency response, and the healthcare, and all the rest of it. So it really is a sort of a perfect storm, if you like. If you want to have a safe fleet operation, these are some of the places you don't really want to be working. Therefore, they have to have really good systems, really good management. So got a lot of experience doing that. Training for the police, various places around the world. So I used to teach at the police college in Hong Kong a couple of times a year. Went out and did some work on drug driving for the police in New Zealand. So a bit of everything, even a bit of counter-terrorism stuff in there, of barriers against vehicle-borne truck-borne vehicle bombs and that sort of stuff, vehicle-borne IEDs. So a bit of everything. And then from that and from the work with the oil and gas industry, I've also done some stuff in the wider sort of safety leadership space, because obviously a lot of the lessons from those very challenging environments are transferable into safety in a wider sense, and the sort of where leaders can go to both get things right and where they can get things wrong.
Fantastic. I think there's about 10 books in there that I've just had, including Hong Kong police and drug driving in New Zealand. Was it New Zealand?
New Zealand, yeah.
New Zealand, yeah. Wow.
So sort of to directly answer your question. So I've known Simon Turner for Drive a Better Business for years, and because we did sort of a few little bits pieces of work together, and then he's currently the chair of the Association for Road Risk Management, and I'm one of the trustees. So we're still working together sort of closely on that. And I'm also had a meeting with Mark Cartwright last week before, about a new thing I'm involved in, which is I sit on the management committee for the Parliamentary Advisory Council for Transport Safety, and they've got a new kind of fleet safety forum that they're going to be running, which I've agreed to chair. And so we were talking about who the first invitees to get involved in that are going to be, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, so there's a lot going on, but I enjoy the work. So
that sounds really fascinating, and I'll put my hand up for I'll come along and help with any of that sort of stuff. My one of the things listeners will know, so originally back in the day, when I was two, I was involved in a car accident before
Right.
kids' car seats and that sort of stuff. It's really interesting to see, because most people don't normally set out to be a safety professional, or
No.
you know, what did you want to be when you grew up, right? What did you want to be?
So, well, we always joke that my brother, when we were little, I wanted to be a millionaire and he wanted to be a tramp. And because I think he doesn't really like responsibility, so he thought that'd be cool. And we both joke that we've both over the years come closer to his objective than mine. But so I don't think I really knew what I wanted to be. So I enjoyed woodwork at school, so I thought being a carpenter might be nice at one point. And then I just kind of floated around a bit, and I was actually doing theatre lighting. So I was a follow spot operator in the West End. And doing sort of crewing for bands and that kind of stuff, and then thought, do I want to be humping flight cases in and out the back of Arctics when I'm 40 and my back's going and all the rest of it? I thought, no, probably not. And so just started looking around for anything that looked interesting. And I'd always enjoyed sort of driving and had an interest in the safety side of things. And I'd done a research project when I was at university for Surrey Police, looking at their graded response. And one of the control room inspectors, I mean, just was sort of chatting to him one evening, and he said, local authority road safety officer, that's what you want to do. He said it's got all of that kind of range of interest, and involves working with young people and all this sort of stuff. So and I think part of the interest in it had been I'd had a girlfriend when I was 15 and she was 17, so go 15-year-old me. And we'd gone out for about 5 months and split up, and then the following year her brother got killed in a car crash, and I went to Simon's funeral, and seeing someone who I still cared about, sort of really sort of upset and stuff, I think planted a bit of a seed of, actually, if I could do something in that space, that would be a worthwhile thing to do. And then 15 years ago, 25 years after we first went out, she got back in touch through Facebook, and we're together now. So yeah, 15 years in, the sort of the absence of Simon is still there as a sort of daily presence in life, of reminding why it's important to keep going with the work.
Yeah, that's amazing story, mate. I'm wow, that's really cool how it's gone full circle as well. So when I was a kid, I thought I wanted to be a professional footballer. Turns out I was rubbish, so I was never going to be good enough. But it's just really interesting how what I thought I fell into, how people tend to fall into safety over time and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just really interesting that when I think back, like, we had this incident and a wheel comes off a truck, and I'm 2, and my sister has that, you know, we're lucky to survive, right? And my younger sister, my mum was pregnant with her, and she was okay in the end. My brother, he had some whiplash and some back injuries, and my sister had her teeth knocked out and stuff. But it was always a big thing in our family that had happened, and certainly the emotional ramifications for me, they used to take the mick out of me, because until about 7, so I'd have not even been 2 when this happened, because my sister is 2 years younger than me. She was not even born yet, but up until I was about 7, I'd still say, "Don't crash the car today, Daddy." You know, and it's just really weird, isn't it? How, you know, even before I worked with transport and stuff, I was working in accident repair, you know, running workshop. That was like my original thing, you know. So yeah, it's just really strange how it's almost like you're destined. I feel like now that I've realized those things, I feel like it's like just part of the calling that I have to go and improve these things, which I think is great, isn't it? So anyway, we're here to talk about 6 ways to reduce risk, and the 6 areas we're going to talk about are policy, procedure, and strategy within one of those umbrellas, and then investigation, communication, monitoring, leadership, and then review as well. So we'll kick it off first of all, if that's okay, with policy, procedure, and strategy. Tell me a bit more about why that's sort of the first thing, or the starting point for reducing risk.
Yeah, so I think the first element of it is working out where you want to be. So one of the first things I say if I'm working with an organization is, you know, you've brought me in, you want to do some work, but actually, where is it you want to be? So being honest with yourselves is the most important thing. So there's no point saying, yeah, we want to be best in class, if actually what you're aiming for is legal minimum compliance or something just above that. Because actually, if what you're aiming for is sort of legal compliance, and you tell everyone that you're aiming for gold-plated, best in class, you know, leading the nation on it, then you're really, really quickly going to lose all credibility in all the measures that you try and do, when the workforce go, but hang on a minute, this is, you know, all this is doing, this is bringing us up to the level that we should be at.
Sure.
And that thing of, and we're talking a bit about the sort of the leadership piece, but that making people understand that you really are committed to it is important. So actually, if what you're committed to is making sure that you're covered legally, then that's what you need to do. And then if you want to say, okay, we're going to do that, and then we're going to build on that afterwards, that's great. But don't tell people that you're going to be, you know, best in class, or, you know, so in the top quartile of your competitors or whatever, if actually that's not what you're aiming for at the moment. So being clear about what it is you're trying to achieve, then set a strategy for trying to achieve it. But unless you've got the right policies and the right procedures and all that kind of stuff, and they're working, you're not going to get to either best in class or minimum compliance. You know, if you just go, well, people know what to do. And the problem with anything around road safety and driving in particular is that everyone's got a driving license before they start work. You know, people go through, if you've got professional drivers, they can like, well, you know, I know what I'm doing. You know, what are you telling me all this for? And actually, you know, taking people with you kind of on that journey, the old cliche, is really important. And setting the right policy, having a policy that's not too complicated, having a policy which doesn't overshoot and try and achieve more than you're actually aiming for.
Yeah.
Making sure it's got the right level of sign off. You know, if you've got an organization where you can get the chief exec to sign the policy saying, you know, this is what we're going to do, I'm really committed to this, that's brilliant. But you need to make sure that person is committed to it as well, and actually understands it and understands the importance of it. Because actually you probably have policies on loads of stuff. You know, you've got a policy on paper recycling, and you've got a policy on road safety, and you've got a policy on, you know, anti-slavery, and, you know, all these different things that organisations have policies on, either because they want a policy on it because they want to do some work on it, or increasingly these days because actually they've bid for a contract, and in the contract framework it says you have to have a modern slavery policy, or you have to have an anti-corruption policy, or you have to have a, you know, so you've got policies on all these things, but actually, which are the ones you're really committed to? And there was an old Dilbert cartoon where the boss says, "Oh, for years we've been saying that our people are our biggest asset, and we've just conducted a review, and actually it turns out it's paper clips." And there is that thing, if the people in that company would probably already know that you value the paper clips more, so it's about making sure that you've got that that sort of very bedded in. Okay, actually, what are we trying to achieve? Actually, where are we trying to get to? What do we need to do that? Have we got the policy right? Have we got the procedures right? Do the procedures make sense? Have we involved the people who are undertaking the work in the procedures? Because otherwise you get someone sitting in an office, writes a procedure, and then the person on the ground who's actually carrying out the procedure finds the workaround, partly because they don't understand why the procedure is the way it is. So all too often we see organizations who have put out a new procedure on whatever it is, but they haven't actually engaged with the workforce and explained to them why the procedure is that way or why the procedure has changed. And actually, most of the time, workforce can find a work around a procedure, and most of the time nothing will go wrong. But it's those occasions when things then do go wrong. You can save a little bit of time every morning on your vehicle checks, and that's great. Most of the time you're not going to have anything catastrophic go wrong, like a wheel loss or something. But every now and then it's going to happen, and when it does, it's the impact of that. So it's making sure that you've actually engaged with people in the developing of the procedures, and the rolling out of the procedures, so those all make sense to them. And that's as important as making sure that what's in the procedure is absolutely the right thing to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. That really resonated with me, because it is interesting when the difference in commitment between, well, for a start, I often have the conversation with people, compliant and safe don't necessarily mean the same thing, right? Yeah. There is a big difference between compliance and safety. Just because a person has a license to drive a vehicle, they're compliant, but that doesn't mean that they're safe necessarily. So, yeah. and there's always little ways of highlighting that to people, but they don't often connect the two things. And then also, like you say, really interesting, the difference in buy-in from the strategic leadership of a business between going, yeah, we're going to meet the minimum, we're going to go with compliant, we want to stay out of jail, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. We don't really want anyone to get hurt. The commitment to that in comparison to being industry leading is huge. It's a huge difference in investment and strategy and focus and all of those things. So yeah, making sure we encourage from a policy and procedural strategic point of view to cut the BS and just go, right, this is where we're heading, we're committed to this, and that's cool. But that's vital. Brilliant. Okay, cool. So, and then the second area is around investigation. So from an investigation point of view, do you mean sort of incident investigation with that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of layers on it. So the first part of things is, obviously, once you decide that you want to do something about this, is find out where you are. So some kind of benchmarking exercise is really important, and making sure that benchmarking exercise isn't. I always talk about the difference between an audit and a peer assist review. So an audit is, as soon as you tell people they're being audited, they'll try and make everything right, and then anything that they can't make right, they try and hide. Because that's human nature. It's an audit. We've got to pass the audit. We've got to, but that doesn't actually help you work out what your problems are. So I always say that that's a bit like having the police come round and you're a drug user and you've got drugs in the house, and so they kick the door in and then they search everywhere and you try and hide everything, and then if they find anything, they sort of bash you over the head or they arrest you or whatever, and you go away for your punishment because you've been bad. And a peer assist review is a bit more like a social worker who, rather than kicking the door in, just kind of comes and rings the doorbell and says, look, we understand that there are things in here that aren't right. But actually our job is to help you get them right. We're going to try and get you off the heroin and get you to reduce the amount of cannabis you're smoking, kind of thing. So we're not necessarily even expecting perfection at this point, but we want to, if we can have an honest discussion about everything that's going on, and you tell us what your problems are and the issues are and the difficulties that you have in getting to how things should be, And again, doing a lot of work in Africa over the years, you get some people who go, oh well, you can't expect it's Africa. What do you expect? And it's kind of like, and then you get other people who go, no, this is, we're going to make it as it should be. And there are some great transport companies. The best driver I've ever had was a guy in Port Harcourt in Nigeria, who they'd all been through an advanced driving course. And this guy absolutely was applying it in a way that I don't think I could have done, in terms of keeping space around you and all the rest. Doing all that in African traffic is not easy. And he was brilliant. And the worst driver I've ever had was also a driver for the same company in Nigeria, in a town called Warri. And he was horrendous. He was so bad, I was having second thoughts about whether we should actually carry on with the trip, as it were. So the first kind of level of investigation is that, actually let's go in and find out what's going on and benchmark. And then after that is any kind of post-incident investigation, or kind of almost like the post near miss investigation. So we don't, as a society, really do enough looking at where things are going right. So we put a lot of effort into going into a school or a hospital or whatever, and working out what's going wrong, but we don't spend as much effort going into the successful schools and hospitals and all the rest of it and working out what's going right. And within transport, we do the same thing. So if we have a serious incident, we'll kind of go, okay, well, we'll go, or a depot that's performing really badly, we'll go and look at that. But we won't go, okay, actually, what about that depot that has like the best crash rate out of the company? Maybe we should be looking at them. Maybe we should be looking at how our safest drivers, what are the differences between our safest drivers and our worst drivers? How can we make them all into more like our safest drivers? And part of that inevitably has to be incident investigation. So taking an example again of one of our customers had a crash, and it was attributed to a burst tire. So they put a whole load of stuff in place, policy and procedure, was lovely, around tire checks, tire replacement, periodic maintenance, all this stuff, and it was all brilliant. And then when we came along and did a review of their investigation, we discovered that actually the damage to the tire wasn't a blowout. It was crash damage after the vehicle had left the road and hit a rock. And therefore that definitely wasn't the cause of why the vehicle had left the road, which is what they thought. And actually it was it was never proved, but strongly suspected it was a drink drive issue. But because they'd gone off down this red herring of the tire, and they have got now one of the best tire checking and maintenance and all that procedures that I've ever seen. But they'd completely missed out on this. No, actually, it was, if you track back what had happened, it looks like the driver was in drink. And so it's that, if you're going to have a policy on something, it's great having one, but put your effort into the stuff that's causing the problems, or most likely to cause significant problems. And you don't get that unless you've got the investigation right. So get the investigation right, get the root cause from that, and then put the measures in to rectify that. But if you get the investigation bit wrong in the first place, then you're on a hiding to nothing, because you're chasing off down the wrong avenues.
Yeah, sure. That's really fascinating, actually, looking at that layered approach you take. So from a benchmarking perspective, that's something that we do all the time. And actually, I like the language there around audit, because you're absolutely right when it comes to auditing. So we do audits. I did a webinar this morning on carrying out workshop audits, and that part of the issue is that as soon as a subcontractor hears they're going to get audited by someone who gives them work, there's this stress involved, isn't there, around, like you say, wanting to either meet the standard, and where they don't meet the standard, hide that they don't meet it and hope that they don't find it. I like the idea of a peer assist review. I think that's taking that counselling approach, because I think the intention's there to do that, but actually we need to facilitate that. Maybe that will come in the communication piece next. That's a really nice way of communicating that. And I really like, from an investigative point of view, I think the open-mindedness, particularly in my world where we see investigating, for example, truck drivers for incidents and stuff like that, there's just this automatic assumption that the driver's at fault for whatever reason. And then there's not an open-minded, open investigation where we look to find stuff. And like you say, I think you're right. We do focus on preventing harm, or preventing rather than promoting great practice, so to speak. I think there's a focus there, isn't there? And I think that shift of focus is really worthwhile. Moving from, I guess, like, it's a bit like the old Jim Collins book, "Good's the enemy of great," right? So to get to good, we focus on what's bad and prevent bad, but to get to great, we need to focus on what creates great, if that makes sense. So it actually reminds me. Sorry.
No, go on.
It reminded me of what you said about. Do you remember Matthew Syed said about the police, the police that he worked with, and in Durham they had the lowest crime rates, and they all just said, "Oh, well, no crime happens in Durham," which is why the crime rates are so good. Not looking at what the best practice that's happening out there.
Yeah,
that's the police, right?
Yeah, and it's one of those things. So I had a meeting earlier this week with a guy, and we were talking about how you do that. The investigation piece, and the fact that, again, I think I probably mentioned it at the conference, if you go back to the 1950s, pretty much every plane crash was put down to pilot error, because they were the easy thing to blame. And actually you kind of go, but what's the organization done? What's the structure of the airline industry done? What's the particular airline that they're working for done in terms of, contributing to that incident happening? And he within his company, they'd had a guy who had been coming down a side road, dual carriageway with a crossing in the middle, and it was fairly common practice for people to just go straight across without stopping. It turns out it's in Eastern Europe, and the guy shot out of the turning, hit someone, fairly major incident. And so they did this incident, looked at the telematics and said, well, look, he was still doing, sort of 80 kilometers an hour as he kind of came out across the junction. And management were like, right, well, we'll sack him. And they said, well, hang on a minute, because actually all of his telematics data has been available to his manager for the last year. And all of his telematics data was already telling us that this guy was speeding. He was, his pattern of driving was really, really not good. And nothing had been done about it. So whilst we can say, yes, this particular incident is this guy's fault, what helped create the circumstances which made that happen? Was he essentially being rewarded for not driving well because by the work pressures that have been put on him and the bonus system and all the rest of it? And so it ended up with, they had a review of what they should do, and they ended up still sacking the driver, but sacking his boss as well, for having helped create the circumstances which had caused it.
Wow. Yeah. That's yes. It reminds me of when I worked for a certain vehicle manufacturer, and I had a company car, and once upon a time, though, we knew they were tracked, and we actually looked at the data behind the tracker, and it was frightening. The sales team, the driving activity of the sales team, rushing from one appointment to another, and I'm going to move on to communication. So tell me a bit more about communication and why that's important in reducing risk.
So one of my favorite sort of sayings is, communication isn't about what I say, it's about what you hear.
Yeah.
So if someone tells you that I'm fond of a drink, one person might think I'm a raging alcoholic, and one person might have a picture of me sitting at home sipping a sherry of an evening. And so, but it's that you've said the same thing, but it gets heard in different ways. So if you say to people, we need to get the job done safely, are they hearing we need to get the job done as being the primary thing, or are they hearing we need to get this done safely as the primary thing? And so all too often we end up with confused primary messages about tasks. So what is it we're trying to accomplish here? Are we trying to accomplish moving this thing from A to B, or hitting the quarterly profit margin or whatever it might be. All of those messages have an impact. So if you tell people that it's really, really important that we hit a particular figure by end of Q1, then that's where their focus goes. And actually, if it means they've got to cut a few corners, break a few speed limits, whatever it is to get there, then that's what they'll do, because that's what you've told them is important to you.
Hello, it's Shani from Flagship Partners. We are really proud to sponsor the Fleet Geeks podcast. If you need expert advice or training for your fleet business, make Flagship Partners your first choice. We are really excited to announce the launch of our Transport Manager Academy. With expert development for fleet leaders, we offer fully accredited initial Transport Manager CPC training, CPC refresher, and operator license awareness training, as well as mentoring, support, and professional development beyond the qualification. Our vision is to develop elite fleet professionals.
And some people won't. Some people will be, no, I'm not. I'm not going to let the, hitting that target for the company compromise the way in which I do my job in a safe way. But it still puts a pressure on them towards doing that. So you get some people who might be behaving recklessly, whatever. Some people will be behaving safely, whatever. And that group in the middle can be shifted in one direction or the other by your communication, how you communicate with them, whether they believe your communication or not. So coming back to the most important thing in our company is paperclips or people. If the best performing bits of organizations are the bits where the managers convince the employees, the rest of the staff, that they are really committed to safety. You can say you're really committed to safety, but if people don't believe it, even if you are, it gets you nowhere. And the other thing on communication is making sure that you're communicating in the right way with people. So, are you communicating in a way with people that they can relate to? So, again, working different places around the world, has kind of made me realize that actually, the way in which a lot of stuff traditionally happens in the West, well, we've written it into a handbook. We've typed up this thing and we've pinned it to the wall, and it's all in 8-point type, really closely typed together. And we were expecting the drivers to read it while they're on their rest breaks. Not going to happen. So you need to think about the reading level of the people that you're communicating with and the reading level of the people who are writing those communications. So the reading level of the UK population in general is something about 10. So your average 10-year-old that's about the average level. Tabloid newspapers are written for a reading age of about 8. And even with those, you will have some people who will struggle with it. So which of your staff have got dyslexia? Do you know? They might need something communicating in a different way. If you've got neurodiverse members of staff, they will take communication on in a different way. So you don't have to necessarily go down and tailor communications individually to each individual driver. But again, you might have drivers who are sort of foreign nationals or who are, come from abroad and now UK citizens, and their spoken English might be brilliant, but their written English might be a bit shakier. So you just have to think about the way in which you communicate those things with them, because you can have the best policy and procedure in the world, but actually if nobody understands them, they're not going to get you anywhere. And so that constant communication of engaging with people, you need to buy into it and you need to get them to buy into it. And how do you do that? The best way of doing that really is by talking to people, having stuff which they find relatable.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, I love. So communication's like my favorite subject. I did NLP master practitioner, so language and communication such a huge part of that. And one of the 10 commandments is the meaning of communication is, like you said, the message that's perceived by the receiver, right? And ultimately, as people, we we project our own emotions and we project our own perspectives onto whatever messages we get, because we filter them through our systems, because we're so overwhelmed with information all the time. We have to delete, distort, and filter the information that we get, and ultimately that's filtered by our perception of the organization. And therefore, if we what's most important is not the words necessarily, but the actions that are taken, and the measurements that are measured, and the commitments that are committed, and the ongoing stuff around there, which is everything you've spoken about, which is absolutely vital to land a message. It's very much about, we can say these things, but we need to do, or like, walk the talk, so to speak, is another buzzword or statement for how to do it. But ultimately, the communication must align with the intentions and the actions and the choices that are made, because at any point we've got a choice, right? We've got a choice between this road and that road. And we've said that we're intending to go that road, but when the actions are taken the other way, that creates, in the communication, that creates a disparity, which is really challenging for people to overcome. And no matter how many times you tell them otherwise, they're never going to believe it. Ultimately, when there's contrasting actions,
and it's that thing of, it's easy to do the right thing until there's a conflict between, if it's, we need to, like I say, get the job done safely. That's great until there's a conflict between getting the job done and getting it done safely. And then what do you do? Do you say, well, okay, I can't do it safely, so I'm not going to do the job? And talking to a guy I used to do a lot of stuff with, who worked at Schlumberger, and he said, we've had instances where we've had clients who have asked us to do a piece of work, and we've said, no, we can't do that safely. And so they've gone and they've given the contract to someone else. He said, but the way that our management system is our commitment to safety is such, we would rather lose the piece of work than cut corners to do it. But that can be very difficult in a business where you kind of go, actually, we need this piece of work. We need them to not go over to using our competitor. We need to, so it's having that commitment when, having the commitment when you can get the job done safely is easy. It's still retaining that commitment when there's a conflict between, okay, we can do the job, but we can't do it safely. Therefore, actually, what decision do we make? Do we take the decision we'll still do the job and keep our fingers crossed? Or do we take the decision that no, getting it done safely is the important bit? So if we can't do it safely, we won't do it at all. And it's difficult.
Yeah, really, really difficult. Fantastic. Oh, I love talking about communication. So the next area, the fourth area, is monitoring. So there's a lot that could be taken from monitoring. Tell me about monitoring.
So again, it comes down to, again, things like the the incident investigation and the peer assist reviews and that kind of stuff. You can putting the policy and the procedures out there and thinking that's great, that's all happening, is lovely. But I've never yet encountered an organisation where there wasn't some kind of disparity between what the policy said and what the manager thought was happening, and what the manager thought was happening and what was actually happening on the ground when you went and looked at it and talked to the people who are actually doing the job. So having that awareness and then going, okay, what needs to change then? Do we need to change what's happening on the ground so that it matches the policy or the procedure? Or actually, is what's happening on the ground okay, and we need to change the policy or procedure so that it matches what's happening on the ground? And quite often it's easy to get caught, sort of hooked up in we need to make sure that what's happening on the ground matches the procedure because we've committed to the procedure. We've told people that's how it should be done. Well, actually, quite often, people will find a different way of doing things that actually might be better, or at least equally as good, but that they're engaged with. So don't be frightened of changing the policy or the procedure to match what's happening on the ground if what's happening there is better. Sure. And the other thing, again, around just, monitoring how people feel about things is important. I did a big chunk of work with BP, and they had a team who were looking at a kind of big data. So all of the different data sets they had within the organization and seeing where there were correlations between them, and then seeing if they can work out if there was causation there. So every year they do their kind of people survey. I feel my manager's door is always open to me. I feel valued by the organization, all that kind of stuff. And they worked out that the people who had the bits of the organization that had really good scores for that also had really good safety performance. And they said at that point, we haven't worked out yet whether it's because managers who manage people really well also manage safety really well, or if it's because people who feel valued are more likely to feel that they should be following what the company wants them to do, and therefore they're engaging in all the safe behaviors and stuff that we want them to. But they said, irrespective of that, what we do know is that if we get a bit of the organization where we've got a poor performance on the people survey, but a good performance on safety, don't trust the safety figures. It just means that things aren't safe there, but they're not being recorded properly. Yeah. So it gave them a really useful tool to investigate. And again, in Nigeria, two halves of the same organization, both operating in the same town, and they all had early version of telematics fitted. So this is over 20 years ago. So it's Drive Right, which at that point was a sensor with a magnet that was taped onto the prop shaft, sort of thing. So it was all pretty primitive stuff, but it gave them an indication of sort of speeding and that sort of stuff. And when they introduced it, the crash rate across the whole fleet dropped by about 25%. And then within 6 to 12 months, half of the fleet had maintained that reduction and actually improved on it. And the other half had actually gone back to a worse performance than they'd had before it was introduced. And it was because you talked to the two managers, and the guy who'd got good performance, he'd split them into separate teams, and he was monitoring what the drivers were doing on a weekly basis, and he was giving feedback to the good ones as well as to the bad ones. He was rewarding the ones who were performing well. And the guy in charge of the other half had sort of said, "Oh yeah, I think I'll get a report on that and I file it." And so the message to his drivers had been, the message to all drivers had been, the bosses know what we're doing. They want us to behave safely and they're watching us. So, right, okay. So everyone behaved themselves. Crashes come down 25%. And then after a while, when people started not behaving very well and nothing happened, they kind of went, oh, well, they're obviously not watching us then. And then the fact that they weren't doing anything about the speeding data that they had, they were kind of like, oh, okay, then they clearly don't really care about safety. So their behavior actually got worse, because they'd not only managed to send the message that they weren't being monitored, but that actually, no, we're seeing this bad behavior, we're not doing anything about it, therefore it must be okay. And it's so that monitoring piece of, how well are the policy and procedures actually working, how well are those communications actually hitting, what is the message that's actually being received by the workforce? Are you one of the companies where they say, oh yeah, they talk a lot about safety, but they don't really mean it? Which is something I've heard a few times. And making sure that you're actually acting on stuff, not least because there's a liability there as well as a benefit. So we did some work with a company who had a whole load of a fleet of about 3,000 vans. And they said, oh yeah, we've got all this telematics stuff. And we had a look through it, and we said, well, you've got vans here that are doing 80 miles an hour on dual carriageways where they shouldn't be doing more than 60. That if they now have a crash doing 80 miles an hour on the dual carriageway, the police come and investigate. If they start looking at this, they're going to go, but this has been a pattern that's been going on for months and months and months and months. You as management haven't done anything about it. So this is not now just one errant driver. This is now a company neglect issue. And then you start getting into corporate manslaughter territory. So
there's some gold in there. So there is some absolute gold in there around. So yeah, I don't really know where to go with everything you've just said there, but there's some absolute gold. So if people didn't pick it up first time, listen back, because you talked about work perceived versus work as done, which is essentially, we talk about a gap there. So there's a gap between what's perceived and what's actually being carried out, and that's where the challenge happens, right? That's where the issues are going to occur. And like you say, if we can eliminate the gap in two ways. One is by monitoring, like you say, and trying to ensure that the work done is raised to the work is perceived, or the other thing is to go, well, actually, is the work being done okay? In which case, that's a consultative piece and going, actually, yeah, now that we've consulted with them, this is the way the preference is. So let's go with that. That's these are the guys at the sharp end who are the expert. Yeah. Let's go to them, right?
Yeah. And in an ideal world, you'll close that loop out ahead of time. So if you've developed a relationship with the workforce where they're involved in the development of the procedure in the first place, so it's not something that's being imposed on them, so they can see the sense in it. But also, if they find a better way of doing something, in an ideal world, you shouldn't be finding that on an audit or on a peer assist review. You should be finding out because they come to you and go, "Hey, boss, I think I found a better way of doing this." Yeah. And so it's a collaborative working model rather than a sort of very tiered structural. The people at the top telling the people at the bottom what to do. It's a lovely idea if you're working in sort of Victorian times, but it doesn't really work in the modern world. There are better ways of doing it, and I'm a big fan of collaborative working practice.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think we need to listen to the people at the sharp end who are doing the job, right? Because they are the experts. And when you ask them, one of my favourite things to do when I talk safety with people at the sharp end, and I say, what is the thing that scares you most around what you do, or what is the biggest fear you have? There's always some gold in there around the work that goes on and the things that people worry about. So fantastic, mate, fantastic. Right, leadership. I'm conscious. I said 60 minutes, and we're at 45 with 2 left to go. Right, but it's amazing. Great conversation so far. So the 5th area is leadership, which is one of my favourite subjects. So let's talk more about leadership then in the context of reducing risk.
Yeah. So again, and I've kind of referenced some of this on the way through. So
it's kind of this virtuous cycle.
Yes, stuff, it's a kind of thread that runs through everything. So making sure that making sure you're doing the right thing as a leader is lovely, but actually that leading by example, and making sure you referenced it's the sort of can you walk the walk as well as talk the talk. If people see that you're doing those things, it's more important for them to be convinced that you believe it than for you to believe it. Almost, you can not care about safety, but as long as you can fool everyone into thinking you do, you'll end up with better performance than if you believe deeply in it, but everyone actually thinks you care about paper clips. So I was in Abu Dhabi doing some work for an oil company, and there was a big global launch with sort of video conference with stuff going on from head office, and the whole office of 80 people or whatever it was were all going through to this sort of lecture theatre setting to have the big video conference from the boss at head office. And as we were on the way there was a vacuum cleaner with the cable going across the corridor. And the guy who was the country manager stopped everyone and wouldn't let anyone carry on until they managed to get this vacuum cleaner moved out of the way so that everyone could go over without tripping. And you kind of go, okay, actually, rather than going, no, it's really important that we're all there on time for the big boss. It was like, no, making sure that nobody falls over is more important than getting there on time. If the CEO of the whole global organization is sitting there staring at a video camera of an empty room for a couple of minutes while we sort this out, that's fine. And it's those kind of messages. Again, we had a client in Oman who we did a review of some of the contractors, and there was one we had real concerns about and said, we really think you need to look at these guys. And he said, can I pause you there? Walked out the room, made a phone call, came back in and said, that contract's now been suspended until further notice. And it was that instant, and it was going to cause them huge logistical difficulties because it was one of their primary logistics contractors for an oil field operation. So suddenly they would have a whole load of stuff that was essential to development of the oil field that wasn't getting to the oil field. But by doing that, it was like, no, this getting it done safely is more important. And if it costs us millions of dollars in delay, that's the price we pay for getting it done safely. And that sent such a strong message across the whole of the rest of all the other subcontractors of, no, actually, they really mean it, and you do it right, or you run the risk of losing your contract. And actually, they were able to make some tweaks and pull in another couple of contractors to do bits and pieces. So, but it sensed that just that leadership step and making sure that things apply to everyone. So, don't have a policy that, there's zero policy on alcohol in the office, except when management is celebrating a new contract being signed, and then the bottle of scotch comes out. It's that kind of thing of lead from the front, communicate well, make sure that people actually believe that what you're doing is what you're doing. And there's a great on the sort of policy procedure, but also come back to the leadership stuff. There's a great book which I happen to have a copy of here. It's not my book, but it's by Professor Andrew Hopkins, and it's called Failure to Learn, and it's about the BP Texas City refinery explosion, and it talks about how they got bogged down in a lot of behavioral safety stuff and started to neglect process safety. And it's about finding the balance between the two. And actually, the leadership that I found in BP, I've got three great. I won't go into them now because we're short on time, but I've got three great sort of leadership examples. And that one from just now of the logistics thing being cancelled was BP as well. So but setting that expectation, and they'd slipped into setting expectations around, we want people to behave safely and drive safely, wear their seatbelt, all the rest of it, but they weren't covering out the process safety stuff well enough. So,
have you ever read that one, Meltdown? That's
no.
about procedural safety, why our systems fail and what we can do about it. Really, that's a really good book as well. So a couple of book recommendations for people there. Meltdown is around the closeness of coupling of one step to another, and the likelihood of failure between the one step to the next step. It's a decent sized book, but I really enjoyed that, so I recommend that, to be fair, as well. I'll take a note of yours as well and put it in the show notes as well for people. I think that sounds like a great reading.
He did another one called Lessons from Longford, which was about a chemical plant incident in Australia, but that one's a bit more technical. This one's a bit more accessible in terms of taking broader lessons from it.
Fantastic. Again, gold in there around leadership, absolute gold. So final area then, review. So I'm assuming if we're thinking about this in a cyclical type sort of virtuous cycle, like I spoke about before, review is making sure that we're doing the things we say we're doing and those kinds of things. Where are you heading with that?
Yeah, so it's about very often you end up with organizations who either don't review stuff, so they kind of go, right, we're doing that and that's how we do it, or they think that's how they do it, and then you get out and discover that actually that's not how they're doing it at all. That's just how the guy in the office thought they were doing it. And then sometimes you get organizations who will almost change stuff for the sake of changing it. So you get a new manager who comes in and they want to make their mark, and so they change a whole load of stuff and upset a whole load of people because those people didn't think those things needed changing, and maybe they did, maybe they didn't. That comes back to the communication piece. But actually just taking the time to sit back and go, no, actually, okay, where are we? What should we be doing? How are things going? Let's take stock. Let's look at all of the different levels within the organization. Let's look at all of the different activities that we've got going on. And let's try and gaze into our crystal ball and look at the future as well. So a lot of the time, review ends up being either looking back at what has happened or trying to take a snapshot of what's going on now. But actually, part of review needs to be saying, okay, actually, what do we think the needs of the business are going to be in 12 months' time, in 2 years' time, in 3 years' time, in 5 years' time? What are the changes that are likely to come along in terms of the business environment we work in, the legislative environment we work in, what those kind of legal requirements are on us, what's out there in terms of vehicle technology that we might want to change what we're doing, or other new software coming out, the growth now of sort of AI. There's stuff that's capable of doing now. If you go back sort of even 5 years, you'd have dash cam footage of inward facing to a driver, but if you wanted to review that footage, you'd look at it after an incident, but if you wanted to check that footage on just a sort of spot check thing, you could watch it through playing it at 5 times normal speed to check they weren't using their phone or something. But actually now you can just feed that into an AI program, and it will look out for those behaviors. So it will look for non-seatbelt wearing, mobile phone, and all the rest of it. So looking ahead at, okay, actually what's coming next? What might be the thing that we might be able to take advantage of? And who do we need to be engaging with to actually be either working with people on the development of stuff, or who do we need to engage with so that we find out early on what are the things that are coming to market, what are the benefits, what are the downsides, because again, you don't want to be just sort of buying new technology for the sake of it. So it's that review piece is kind of almost constant. So it includes the incident investigation piece, it includes the peer assist, it includes the audits, it includes the monitoring stuff. But actually it's try and make it a formal process of, okay, let's sit back, let's look at what's gone not so well, let's also look at what's gone well, let's look at what's going well now and what's being problematic at the moment, and let's try and cast an eye to the future and say, okay, this is our operation now, so that we are in a better place in 5 years' time than we are now, in terms of safety, financially, everything else. What are the things that we need to put in place to get us to that space that we want to be in?
Yeah, fantastic. That's great takeaway for people, actually. Many people will have come across SWOT. I always think there's a value in doing SWOT from a future-based perspective, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for those that aren't aware, but also to have a look at PESTLE. And if you haven't come across PESTLE, then to Google PESTLE. But that's very similar to what you're speaking about, isn't it? Political, economical, social, technical. What are the things that we're going to butt up against over the coming 2, 3, 5 years? And at the moment, there's loads of stuff, isn't there? You know, with technologically, particularly, we're on this sort of upward trajectory, which we need to keep pace of. And I think we'll overall, if we use it in the right way, we'll overall improve the reduction of risk as well. Yeah, I think if we embrace those. So you've been an absolute gentleman, and what a fantastic podcast. Genuinely 60 minutes of gold. Really, really, really good podcast. Thank you very much for sharing your experience.
It's been my pleasure. It's been good to chat.
Yeah, it's been really nice, and some wonderful stories to illustrate the points as well, from all around the world. So I'm almost jealous of the storytelling capability. Mine are all a little bit more vanilla in comparison to all of these far out and wonderful places you've been. That's some experience you speak from. So I'm really grateful for you taking the time out to come and join me on the podcast.
No problem. Happy to help, mate.
And it's been really, really good to listen as well. So just a quick one. If people are listening and they want to connect and learn more about Transafe and your work and that kind of stuff, is LinkedIn the best place to find you? If so, I'll put a link in the show notes for people. Yeah, find me on LinkedIn. I'm fortunately or unfortunately appears to be the only person in the world with this particular combination of first name and surname. So grab me on LinkedIn, have a look at the website, transafenetwork.com, and that'll give you a flavor of some of what we do. But hit me up on LinkedIn, and always happy to obviously there's a certain amount of stuff that you want to charge for, etc. But if people have got issues, come to me and I'll try and put you in the right direction. And if we can't help, we usually know someone who can. Yeah, that's really helpful. Appreciate it. I'm just thinking of people searching your name on LinkedIn now and it going, your search has returned one response rather than like Google, which is loads. There's one response. There's only one Saul Jeavons. Fantastic. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope listeners have enjoyed this podcast, and I look forward to catching up with you guys on the next one. Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please share with your friends and colleagues too. Join us for free on Facebook with the Fleet Geeks community for transport and fleet managers. Fleet Geeks offers ongoing professional development, networking and mentoring too. So get in touch with me, Pete Rushmer, on any social media platform to find out more.